There's a spirit of Dixie. We sing about it. We do all of these other things, but it's there within us. It's within you, Lyman. You can't destroy it. You can't get rid of it.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a podcast brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation and hosted by noted writer Lyman who has chronicled the stories, culture, and character of Utah's Dixie for more than 40 years.
It's one of those almost perfect days in Dixie, early October, and the air's just so nice out there. And it's that time of year in St. George when everybody starts feeling like, okay, maybe this endless hot summer is over. We're in for an amazing and beautiful fall. But what makes this day so great for me is to have two of the truly great men of Utah's Dixie here in the studio with Ricky and myself. Today, I just feel blessed. I've been looking forward to this for such a long time, to have Dr. Richard Whitehead and his younger brother, George Whitehead, in the studio today. These two men, they embody the Dixie Spirit in such an amazing way. They just bring that lineage of Southern Utah history and everything that's good about this place. They bring all of that together, not only in their lineage, but also in their works and what they've done in their lives, what they continue to do day to day in their lives here in St. George. I'm so looking forward to talking to you, Dick, and to you, George, about your stories of this place. And those stories really go back to the actual founding of St. George. And Dick, I wondered if maybe we could just start with you setting that stage a little bit with the Whitehead family.
Well, A.R. Whitehead, who would be Adolphus Rennie, is what A.R. stands for. He would be my great-great-grandfather. And he arrived here in December of 1861, based on a call from Brigham Young to come and help settle the area. My great-grandfather, George Frank Whitehead, whom my brother George is named for, he was born in Salt Lake in 1863, in November of 1863, and came here then. A fun story I like to tell is that he was alive when I left on my mission. He died the day I entered the MTC, so I tell people, I went fishing with him when I was a teenager, and he was alive when I left on my mission at 19, and they look at me and say, you couldn't have known anybody born in 1863 for 19 years.
That is amazing, Dick. It's hard to even imagine that you, as a young man, knew someone who was one of the original pioneers of this town.
Yeah, he has a great legacy. He was a temple president. He was a justice of the peace. George helped me a little. He was mayor.
The city of St. George. He served 2 terms as the temple president.
He was a founder of Dixie College.
State College.
Yeah. It's a great legacy. The story I like to tell about him, I don't know how old I was then, but he would have been in his 90s. I was probably 14 or 15. My dad and he and I went fishing. Dad wanted to take his grandpa up, and so we went to Grass Valley up north of Pine Valley fishing. There was a barbed wire fence that had a little step over, and we went across that, and then there's kind of a lava area along, and you walk around to get to the thing, and Grandpa was going pretty tenderly along the way, and Dad said to him, well, Grandpa, where do you want to fish today? And as he turned, he slipped on a rock and went head over heels, probably 10 to 20 feet down the hill, and lit with both feet flat, like right at the edge of the reservoir there. And he turned around and he said, this looks like a pretty nice place.
That is awesome. Oh, that.
Sure, he had bruises the next day.
And how old would he have been?
He would have been in his early 90s
early
then.
90s.
Uh-huh.
And he has already done all of these things that you've mentioned in his life. And there he is in Grass Valley fishing with his grandson and
his
great-grandson.
Yeah.
That's tremendous. What do you remember about him, his character, his personality? It'd be great to have a better sense of that.
He was very oriented towards the community. He was a carpenter by trade and built his home that's still there on First West. It was a very unique place because it had a stairway that you enter the front door and a stairway that you enter the back door, and they crisscrossed in the middle. So if you wanted to go to a room above the front door, you would go up halfway up the stairs, step over to the other one, and then go back up the other way. I don't know if that's still there, but...
and it's a great place to go and play tag and everything else through there because you could run up through and go there and go down to the kitchen or go back up. And it was just so fun to jump across those stairways.
George, share some of your memories.
Well,
you were younger when he died, but you remember him.
I was with him. I was 8 years of age, and I remember him in the corner of his house that he did build, and he's laying as like a hospital bed there and just almost skin and bones. He was really at that age, at 98.
Now, this house, again, is on...
called the George F. Whitehead home on 100 West.
And it's
below
now,
diagonal.
Of the Seven Wives.
Yeah, it's right there by the Brigham Young home and around the corner. No, it's owned. No, it's owned. It's a beautiful place. It's a private home.
Private home.
A private home.
And then next to him, he had his some of his kids. Gordon built a home there, and Nett Whitehead Gardner, Rex Gardner's wife, built a home there. They had those lots that were divvied out at the time that everybody came here. Yep. One of the things that I remember, because we were talking about Pioneer, you can't talk about the legacy of George Frank Whitehead without talking about his wife, Esther Morris. She was incredible in her own right. I mean, she was one of the finest cooks that anyone could ever have. She stood behind him in everything that he wanted to do. For 30-plus years, she served as the Relief Society or Stake Relief Society president in the ward, in the West Ward. She was an amazing person, too. So in her own right, that's the way it went. I remember them telling Edna, one of his daughters, was telling me as I was writing a paper for the college about him, that Esther wanted to have water upstairs in her home, but they didn't have the plumbing. So they got bamboo and ran it from the ditch off of Diagonal. It came down and they hollowed out the bamboo, and they would run water through there so they could hit gravity fed into their bathroom up in the in the upstairs. That was how it started out long time before.
Would that have maybe been the first upstairs plumbing?
I'm not sure whether it was or not, but they got water to there that way. Some of the other things that came out when I was doing the research on George Frank Whitehead was what kind of a student he was. He was talented. He played the trumpet. He did every kind of thing possible. But he was the best speller in all of southern Utah. They had a southern Utah spelling bee, and he spelled down everybody all the way through high school as a 9-year-old. So, those are the legacies that we read the history, we know what they did, and they really motivate you. My mother, when she was dying of cancer, I think all of us were there. The question was asked, is there anything as a matriarch of this family that you'd like us to remember? And I remember her words, remember the blood that flows in your veins. And when you look back at George Frank Whitehead and then all of the others, A.R. Whitehead, of that line, plus all of the MacArthur line, all of the Morris line, all of these people that were pioneers, Dick and I can go over to the encampment mall and we'll find all of our great-great-grandparents on there. It's amazing.
It's really interesting. I'm glad that George brought up Esther, his wife, because she was an amazing cook. If you ever had her rice pudding, you would never have rice pudding that was equal. I mean, it was just the very best. One thing I'd like to suggest, often today when a person is called to be the temple president, then his wife is the matron of the temple. That was not the case back in those days. So Esther never served as the matron of the temple. There was another lady, I don't have her name right in front of me, but she served as the matron of the temple for 3 different temple presidents through that time frame. I think it was about 1895, something like that.
if we drop back even further, they were from England, Cambridge area, and they came to the United States and then came across with were they part of that early migration?
Sure they were.
They actually left from Nauvoo when they got up the river Nauvoo and came across that
I
way.
see. And so AR came here. He had grown up in England. He was an English person. He probably still spoke with an English accent when he got here, I would
I wasn't
imagine.
here to ask him.
I just like to imagine these things because it's so awesome to think that all the folks that came to this town, your great-great-grandfather was speaking with an English accent. My great-great-grandfather hardly spoke English. He was speaking Swiss, and the English that he could speak was with a thick Swiss accent. There were people from Scotland, from Wales, from Denmark, from all of these places that came to this little valley here, and A.R. Whitehead was one of those. And it's just amazing to think how all of these disparate people came together, but they were one in their faith and one in their vision for this community.
One of the interesting stories early on that ties it more in with modern Dixie history is that the coach that passed away at the ice plant.
Oh, yeah. That was George F.'s son.
He was a coach when the Flyers kind of got their name when they went back to Chicago.
In the 20s.
Yeah, he went back to Chicago, and he worked at the ice plant that our fathers both ran for so long and started, et cetera. But he worked there as a young man while he was coaching. And there's a big water wheel. The water came out of Watercress. There was no golf course up there then. And it was piped along the hill, probably about 80 feet, I would guess, above where it dropped off. And then it ran into a big wheel that turned on the outside. And then inside there was another wheel that generated the electricity for the ice plant.
Brinery.
Each day it had to be oiled with one of those little spigots that you spray oil on it, and so that was one of the things that he did. And I think he was about 38, if I'm remembering right. And he went up there by himself and was back there, and he had on some overalls, and it caught in the wheel on the inside in one of the little things that caught the water and literally beat him to death. So he died at that young age.
He was the father of Evan Whitehead, who was the sheriff. You know, you look at his line through, and then you have Kyle, it's the chief of police here, and so on. So there's quite a legacy of our last name that we really have a lot to live up to.
I mean, I'm thinking of George F. Whitehead. He comes here. He's just a boy when he gets here to St. George. He grows up here. He becomes mayor. He does all of these things. What was it about him that made him who he was?
I think he was very service-oriented. I think that he loved doing things for other people. I think his carpentry, people enjoyed his carpentry that he did, and he was very good at it. And I think he was just someone that everyone could trust. You know, he just had a good relationship. One of the great thing about all those pioneers, you mentioned yours came from a different background completely. And they may have different accents. They may not have spoken the language, but they worked together. They were there for a purpose. The cotton fields that was originally for why they came began to be a big special thing in their lives, and they were there for a common purpose. I guess that's the best way to put it.
And that comes down through the generations to the two of you. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But George, go ahead there.
One of the things that set George F. apart was his unbelievable faith. He never had any doubt. This Book of Mormon's true. I mean, he gave me a Book of Mormon when I was born with his picture and his wife in there. He knew this. Read this every day. This was clear. This is 75 years ago when I got this book. I still have it. But his faith is what made him who he was. His work ethic, his love of the Lord, his doing everything. A fun story about our father in relationship to his grandfather, George F., is that George F. was a very good friend of many of the prophets, but especially Heber J. Grant. and they would come down and they'd do buggy rides and do everything. And everybody knows President Grant couldn't sing, but he also couldn't have boys. He had all girls. So George F. Whitehead promised him one day, he said, "I'm going to name my next boy after you." He had 2 girls. So his oldest, Gordon, his first son, was our father. His name is Grant Church Whitehead. So he named him after Heber J. Grant to keep his word of where he would go along. And so those are the kind of the pioneer things that they motivate us, but we know that we have to be faith seekers to keep up with the legacy that those pioneers have left behind for us and play it forward. He was a very faithful man.
And that, again, that has come forward through the generations. And when I think of your father and your mother, and they're both legendary figures in the story of this town, and they're both pioneers in their own right in a newer generation, just the way the 2 of you have become pioneers in your own right in a much more recent generation.
Let me add a comment just before that. You mentioned him being named after our father, named after Heber J. Grant. I've often wondered how many people, as President Grant went around, that he said, "I don't have anybody," how many Grants came from that story. But one of the stories that I like is that my dad and President Grant were out playing catch in their front yard with baseball. Dad was a great baseball player, by the way. They went in the house, and Heber J. Grant was singing some song to him, and then Grandma Esther came into the room, and he turned to my father and said, "What did you think of my singing?" And he said, "Not much."
Oh, that's classic. Just that image of your grandpa and Heber J. Grant playing catch right there on Diagonal. Is that
Just off Diagonal?
Just off Diagonal on First West.
It would be so awesome to see that.
Heber J. Grant spent a lot of time with George F.
That is
Very good
really, really neat. My goodness. So let's talk about your mom and dad a little bit. The ice plant, that was part of the heart of St. George. It's part of what helped us survive here.
Dad was the only one from south of Provo that knew how to pasteurize milk. So that kept him out of the Army. All of his brothers served in the service, all 3 of them at one point or another. But Dad didn't do that. They kept him for that reason, to do that. And so the ice plant was the only place you could get ice, but it was also the only place that you could get pasteurized milk. And so they gathered milk from all around the area, a lot of the farmers and producers and so forth. They pick up the milk at 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. Wayne, our uncle, and our dad, they had 2 shifts. One started at 3:30 in the morning, and they would go to the ice plant where they would pasteurize the milk from the 6 o'clock milking the night before. And then the other would start at 6 in the morning and go gather it up, and that person would run the second pasteurization of that milk. But there are so many stories that you could tell about that. George, I'm sure you've got some good ones. I'll think of.
Well, I can tell you that the St. George Ice Company, they needed to have ice. If you remember back from your own history down in Atkinville, they would chop some ice up and bring it down and store it in the caves and put ice on it so they could have root beer on the 4th of July. But with ice boxes, they had to have ice that they could do. So this brinery would, I think it started originally with 3,100-pound vats. So they'd fill those up with water, and you'd have 100-pound blocks of ice. As a young kid, I thought, how could I ever pull these out? Because my dad would say, go, Rocky Mountain wants 300 pounds of ice to go on the trucks to Kingman. And you'd just do everything you could to get it up onto the wall and then walk it over, tip it over, and make these things fall off. Then the casing weighed more than what the ice inside. So you're really trying to pull about 200 pounds out of there. But the brinery was what allowed the milk to flow over the coils that would cool the milk. So they really inherited a job where they could sell ice at a penny a pound. With the milk that came through, all of the half pints of milk that went to every East Elementary, West Elementary, every school, bottled, capped, taken to school lunches, picked up, cleaned, run through the bottle washers. I think both Dick and I both ran bottles through there. We both picked up milk from all of the dairies out in the middle of town. We did a door-to-door service of bottled milk and run them in and drop off homogenized milk, skim milk, regular milk, 2 pounds of butter. That's all of what we grew up.
That's an all-consuming job.
It was an amazing thing. And so when it was time for him to retire, nobody wanted to buy that business. It was too much work for too little money.
When did they start in the ice business, and what precipitated that?
Well, they had some cows before in their backyard that they milked and so forth. I don't know what really instigated them learning how to process milk and so forth.
Yeah, I think it was in the early 30s or late 29 when St. George Ice Company opened up. It was nice. I mean,
and it was on Diagonal Street.
On Diagonal all the way up like 700 North Diagonal.
And I remember that from my own boyhood, but it's so far gone now that you kind of forget.
Yeah.
You forget that, and yet that was such an integral part of our culture and our
Rocky Mountain
economy.
Rocky Mountain Company, before they had refrigerated long-haul trailers, they would just call up and say, "Hey, Grant, we need 1,500 pounds as soon as you can get it down here. We're icing our produce to take to Kingman or to Ely or wherever." And you'd take them down in 100-pound blocks as fast as you could get it there to them. And it was a workout at a penny a pound.
So sometimes the trucks would come there. Staley Farms did a lot of radishes and similar kind of.
That's the difference in our age. I delivered to Rocky. He had them come.
Yeah, so you'd pull out the ice and chip it into a box, maybe 2 feet by 1 foot by 1 feet high, and chip it all up, and then they would lift it up and dump it over the top of the vegetables so that they would be cool. There was no refrigeration in trucks then at all. And
yeah, my brother actually has a panel off of one of our trucks, Whitehead Dairy, that he has in his backyard so people can come in and just understand what Whitehead Dairy is.
it was really a unique thing, and washing those bottles was quite an experience for us. They took half-pint bottles all over the county to Santa Clara Elementary and to Washington, even to Hurricane, and then we would have to wash those at the end of the day. And it was really, George probably experienced the same thing. You'd put 4 in dirty things, and then after you got, 4 or 5 cases, maybe 100 plus, the bottles would come out clean at the other side. So you put in 4, you take out 4, and then we had to fill the ice cans with water that were left. That was part of our job, was to fill the ice cans and do the bottles. I tried to work out a way that I can go ahead and run into the other room, turn the ice on, fill up an ice can and run back out and still catch it in time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we didn't get there and the water would spill into the brine, and then we were in trouble with our parents.
Yep. I remember those little half-pint bottles were the pits, because kids at the school lunch, they didn't care. They'd stick their napkin down in there and their straw down in there, and then they all kept their bottle caps because they played a little game of bottle caps.
Yeah.
You remember the bottle cap thing, up or down. But then they'd forget. Those bottles are dirty and they're coming back. These little fingers would have to get down in there to get those straws and the napkin. Oh, I think I was mad at my own friends from the school lunch program.
I used to get so upset. Clark, who's my age, who's Wayne's son, he was always involved in theater and other things like that. And I think he arranged it on purpose so that he couldn't come up and do the bottles. And so I usually would end up with that. And
well, I was going to ask both of you, because you were growing up, you were involved in so many activities, and yet you're working so hard. How did all that work? Because I know you loved to play baseball in the summertime and all the things that you did. So did you just work a lot and play a lot? And
you just made it happen. We're both involved in track. We usually would finish around 4 or so, and then that's when I'd go to do the bottles. Got a couple of stories I want to tell you, one in particular. Well, I'll tell you the first one quick. On Saturdays, of course, this was a time for both Wayne and Dad to have a little bit of relaxation and time off themselves. And someone would call and, I need to get some ice, I'm going fishing. So we'd go up and pull out a 100-pound thing of ice, chip off enough to fill a little thing, and then
15 pounds.
and charge them 10 cents or 15 cents. And then the rest of that ice would sit there and melt over the weekend. But the other story I wanted to tell is when I was 15, they both wanted to have some time to themselves in the afternoon and so forth. And so often Dad would have me go and pick up the milk from different places around the community. And some of the farmers that lived further out would bring it into a central place, but we had to pick it up.
Yep.
And I didn't have a driver's license, but every policeman knew who I was. And so as long as it was the right time of day and I was in the milk truck, I'd pass a policeman, they'd wave at me, and no problem. But I did that for my 15 years.
You were performing a crucial task for the community.
So,
I think both of us picked up from Cyphus's and from Harmon's and all of these.
Rogers.
Yeah, Art Rogers. And they'd have these in these 10-gallon cans of what they milked, still warm in the cans, and we'd load those in. There usually about 25 or 30 of them in the back of our truck. And Dick was strong. I did everything I could to get this up to. You had to weigh all the milk and how much butterfat was, so you could pay the people that were supplying it to us. Oh, hell was I had forgotten.
They're paid by the weight of the milk and not by the volume.
Yep.
I just think about how precious ice must have been in St. George, Utah in July of 1949 or 1953 or whenever you were doing that. It was a penny a pound, and it should have been as valuable as gold in this hot place.
Dixie Market years later, I don't know when that would have been, in late 60s maybe, George.
Yeah.
They did some ice down there too.
So I'm sitting here looking at both of you and thinking, okay, this is what made you who you are, working so hard in that spirit of your parents and your grandparents. But then the two of you moved on to the great things that you've done for Dixie. But before we do that, I want to talk about your mom, because it's so awesome.
Our mother was our matriarch. I mean, she was kind of an Esther Morris Whitehead type person. She was an incredible cook. Wasn't anything she couldn't do. She won awards for her cinnamon rolls, and she'd have her picture in the Deseret News or whatever. She worked in the PTA all over everywhere. And she supported my father in all of his church work and all of the callings that he had everywhere. And then she would have projects. She said, I've always wanted to have a room added on our house, a bigger room. What are we going to do for a project? And she came up with a project of making French fries. So if you've ever been to In-N-Out and you see the person with the peeled potatoes, and that's what, I don't know if I thought you were in on it, and so was I, but we did it in our basement. We had an abrasive peeler, and we'd bring all these potatoes down from Enterprise. My dad would pick them up when he would go to drop milk off up there, pasteurized milk, and then we'd run them through the abrasive peeler. No running water downstairs. We'd run a hose through the outside window to be able to clean up and down the drain. Throw all the peelings out, make those things up, take him to the Dairy Freeze and the Polar Bear and the DQ, and everybody would buy these things so that we could raise money.
So those were those great fries we ate.
Awesome French fries that you would have. We made those.
Wow.
And that was my mom's project.
I've been looking for fries like that ever since.
I make them for my kids, and they love them. Oh, Grandpa, we're going to have French fries. That was Mom's project. We're going to build onto this house.
What was the name of the substance that we put those white?
Stay white.
Stay white. You'd put and they would be good for
starch gold black.
For 3 to 5 days before they would.
So we'd sell them in great big 15-pound bags to all those places that we were just talking about. I think Walter Rice's dad ran the Dairy Freeze or something, and he was one of our first ones, and then they just blossomed, and they were going around. Even the restaurants were using these fries, of bagged fries. So you could go in and we'd put a 5-gallon thing of milk up in their milk machine, the dispenser, and drop them off a couple of things of fries. And that's what my mom eventually helped her get started on this. And then she got into the flower business. She started her own business of the Garden of Edith.
One of the unique things about Mom is the way she was involved in the community. She represented Southern Utah at Washington, D.C. in the White House Conference on Children and Youth. Her and a girl in my class, Christine Cox, was the young person who went back to that. But they were involved in a lot of things like that. One of my favorite stories about Mom is, of course, we were all involved in the kids parades every year at the rodeo, the Lions rodeo, and that was always important that you win.
She was the queen of paper mache.
One of my favorite stories is my sister, Beverly, and 3 other girls had perfect scores when they went to college. All of them, thought that they would have a great chance to be the D-Day Queen, which is a big thing in their life, and it was based a lot on academics to qualify, and faculty had a vote and so forth. Anyway, this particular year there were the 4, and I'm sure they all wondered who it would be, but there was another person who had just gone through school who also had those kind of marks. She was a grandmother at the time, but she was going through school. And it ended up that she was the one who was chosen to be the homecoming queen. That made my mother angry. You don't want to see my mother get angry. So she went to the president, I think it was Arthur Brune, and told him, how could you do that? I mean, this woman came out of nowhere, went to 2 years of college. These girls have worked all their life for this. It's a great experience for them. How could you do that? And he said, we really don't have any control. And she said, well, I know you can't change it, but you need to change it for the future. Make it so the kids are that age have that opportunity. And Mom belonged to Alice Woolley's Reynolds Club. Everybody respected her. And, of course, she kind of spread this message around, and they talked about it a lot at their club meetings. And about a week after she went to see President Brune, he called her on the phone, and he said, okay, Edith, I've got it straight. Call your dogs off. And I'm sure every one of these women were just on his case all the time, but she had that kind of influence in the community. They all respected her. One of my great stories about Mom, back in those days, the county news used to publish a picture and a farewell time for everyone who was called to serve a mission. So Mom made it a point. Back then, they wore corsages to dances, and girls would often carry them corsage onto a sacrament meeting and so forth. So every time my mom found out, and it wasn't hard to find out, who had a mission call and when their farewell was going to be, she would take a beautiful corsage, a big orchid corsage, purple orchid corsage that probably would have sold for around $5 back then, I suppose.
$7.50, white one.
Yeah, and take them to their home for the missionary's mother to wear to sacrament meeting the next day. Nobody ever knew that except the person who received them. And I'm sure it cost a lot of money, but that was just something she did on the QT all the time.
That is so neat. That's so neat.
In addition to a bouquet every Sunday at sacrament meeting, every Sunday for her life. Before she owned a flower shop or after. She had an amazing garden. We'd come over to Santa Clara to the desert nursery that was over there and buy rose bushes and bulbs and every kind of thing. She had the most amazing wisteria growing on her house you could ever imagine.
Several people told her the reason they went to church was to see the bouquets. Then they went on a mission in 1975, 76, 18-month mission to England, and were assigned to the London Temple. And, of course, their yards were unbelievable. So every day she would see there was fresh flowers in the temple. Not like we see today, that are arranged and artificial, but they were fresh flowers every day that they was there.
Edith Whitehead. Again, I didn't really know your mom, but I sure knew who she was, and everyone knew who she was. And the Garden of Edith was a very special place. I know, George, you have some memories or stories that are pretty special there.
It was just super special for me because I could look back and a lot of the success that I had by working at Dixie State College for 37 years had its beginnings in the Garden of Edith. All because my brother's 10 years older than me, all of his friends were coming and buying corsages to go to all these dances. And I put them all in alphabetical order, and they would come in and I'd say, hey, who's next? Oh, this is Nolan Archibald. Oh, you're going with Margaret tonight. Okay. I'd go, and I had it all stacked, and I'd come up here, ooh, this is going to be special. You got one of those orchids. That's a $5.16. And the next one, I started going through all of these people that were his age or a little older or a little younger, and it happened year after year. I memorized the names of all those alumni. I just knew who they were. I could tell you who. Oh, Garth Pickett. Oh, I've got one right here for you, Garth Pickett. Oh, Garth Nell, I got one right here for you. And I could go through every one. Then it was preference. So all the girls would come in, and they all bought boutonnieres for their, and they'd come in, oh, hey, look at this. I got one right here for Pat Terry. This is going that way. And, so you just knew. I learned, and I got to know who these people were at a young age and saw how their careers went forward. I mean, they became my friends. Now I'm working at Dixie with the alumni, and I can call Monty Vernon. I know him. Or, well, I know this person, and my brother knows that I knew him because I learned of who they were from him. So that flower shop was really tremendous and had such a meaning with the whole community. I mean, Jay Entz would come in and say, hey, I got to have a dozen roses for Janice. Just put them on my bill and send them, and he did that like 6 times a month. A dozen roses, and finally wait a minute, that's quite a bill. I better start getting to Jay and see if he's going to pay that. But it would go great. On, and people like Jim Bracken that just roamed the streets. He'd come in, and I just wanted to smell this place and look at all you pretty women in here. And it was just the way that it was. The flower shop was a hub.
For our listeners who aren't aware of that history, where was the shop?
57 North Main.
It was right there.
You'd go down, you had Nels Fenton's Rexall store, you had the House of Beauty up there that was on one, and you come on down, you hit the flower shop, you hit Tom MacArthur's jewelry store, then you got the theater, then you had a little blank, you had the Quality Bakery, the Center Department Store, Hearst on the end, was just across the street. You had Althea's, you had Snow Apartments and the Snow Cleaners and Dixie Shoe Repair, and of course the Sun Bowl. Club.
But there was an institution right there in the middle of that historic street. And again, it strikes me, the two of you were involved with ice, supplying the community with ice, and then you supplied the community with flowers, two of the most important things that people needed.
Well, if they weren't, our parents made them feel like they were important, I can tell you that. It was nice. They went out and worked hard for what they did. And my father was a charter member of the fire department, and he was a perfect attendance, 35 years or something, perfect attendance at Rotary Club. Even when he went to over here, they had the Rotary Ends. Every time that my father had something, my mother was behind it planning another program, a Golden Green ball or the fireman's convention, not just a local fireman's thing, the state fireman's convention, and my mom's all over it, or the Rotary Club thing, and my mother was in on out, not just the flowers, but helping with food and organizing. She's just an incredible organizer that it didn't matter what time of day it was. She got up and just did that. But that's what our father did. I remember my father, one time I played a basketball game down in southern Nevada, playing Las Vegas High School. I was my brother was off to dental school at that time, and we got home at about 2:15 or 2:20 a.m. from Vegas. And my father would lay out his clothes to go to work by 3 o'clock in the morning so that he wouldn't bother my mom while he was getting dressed to go up to the ice plant. And that morning, I was coming in, and I saw my father in that chair off the dining room where he'd lay his stuff, and he was in a suit and tie, and he was just coming in from doing church service and had a long night, and he was just about ready to take his suit and tie off and put this work clothes on when I walked in. And he said, "George, you will never be owning the St. George ice plant. I will sell it before any of my kids have to do this." Because getting up at 3, but never going to sleep, that's one of the big remembrances I have of my parents. They didn't know what it was like to go to bed or to get up. My mother would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning so she could be up at Kolob by sunrise on opening day of fishing, so she could be there and drive before. All of the things that they loved that motivated them, the clock made no issue or no difference. They were going to do it.
Wow.
I had a similar experience with my dad, too. I was going to tell you one other thing about Mom. She loved to fish. I mean, she really loved to fish.
And play cards. Fish and play cards.
But you don't clean them, and you don't cook them, but you catch them, and you give them away or whatever. All of the men like to go with her, and up at Sand Cove where the water comes in there, she would go up and fly fish, with hip waders and Big Fry and her uncle Bish and several of the really great men that fly fished a lot. They loved to have her come because it was so much fun to do that. One day she said, "We got to go fishing." And so she didn't drive. But once she get her driver's license, she was 40-something.
To drive but a milk truck.
Yeah.
We never owned a car till my brother was like 15.
53 Pontiac, I think, was first we had. Anyway, so she said, "Dick, you needed to take me up to Baker Dam, and, to fish." And so we got about halfway there, about where Dameron Valley is, somewhere along there. Had a blowout on the car. And so we got out, and I knew how to change the thing and everything, and had the up on the jack, and got the car, and she's anxious to get this over with because we're going fishing, And so ultimately, she was just trying to help, and threw the old tire into the trunk, and it knocked the car off the jack, and the back of the trunk hit her on the head and made a gash of about 1.5 inches, bleeding profusely. And I said, "We need to go back and take you, you're going to need some stitches." "No, it'll be okay." No, why? You were going to go get some stitches. So we went back, and I think it was A.W. McGregor or Con, one of them, put a bunch of stitches in her. As soon as we were done, now we're going fishing. So as soon as they were finished, then we took off and went fishing. That's just the way it was.
Everything that you're sharing here it goes without saying, but you're just defining that Dixie spirit perfectly. Your family exudes that in every way. And I think about, George, what you were saying about your dad saying that you're not going to be in the ice business. And I love that idea. I think the main reason I went to college is because I spent my teenage years changing tires at OK Tire on the boulevard and working my little tail off there. And it's like, maybe I'm going to
Phil Squire.
Go on and go to college. But let's talk about how all of this foundation transcended into who you are, the two of you. And I know you don't want to talk about yourselves, but I know just enough about each of you to know the amazing impact that you've had on this community, not just this community, but the country, even the world, in the work that you've done. And Dick, maybe talk about how a boy from the ice plant went on to become one of the leading oral surgeons in the country.
Well, it was quite an experience. Back in my day, you were scared to death that you would be drafted if you were not 4F, which means you didn't qualify then for diabetes or some other thing. Then you always were afraid that your name would come up. So many of us in my class, in 1960 class, we just had a reunion last week, joined the National Guard. And so we went down there. And one thing I guess that I need to tell you that leads into all of this, George told about the time that Dad didn't want him to be that. He didn't want me to be that either. I was 13 at the time, and we pulled between the old Liberty Hotel, Liberty Cafe, and then there was an auto parts car with a lane that went down between. And we pulled in there, and my dad said to Roy Lyle, anything around here that my son could do. I don't want him doing what I do. He needs to learn something else. So Roy said, well, yeah, I'm a little behind. I need some potatoes peeled. So I got off of the truck right then, and I worked for Roy for the next 4.5 years, I guess. And he taught me how to cook, fry cook. And I would do the afternoon shift, and we fed a lot of the people that were here making movies. A lot of the movie stores came there to eat. That was one of the best places to eat. So that's really where I learned to work. So I go in the Army. We're a Battery B Battalion howitzer unit. So I signed up to go to
Fort Ord.
to Fort Ord and wanted to go to the Midwest, to Howitzer Sports Hill, Oklahoma. And when I got out of basic, I was assigned to be a cook in one of the local units. And I thought, this is stupid. So I got there, and we're called OJTs, on-the-job trainees. They were going to teach me how to cook. And the guys that were there before me, one of them had gone AWOL, so the mess sergeant was, you're not getting any time off for 2 weeks. But after I'd been there for a while, this man had great trust in me. He knew I knew what I was doing. He knew he could trust me and everything. And so the military was a great experience for me. And I remember George came down with my parents when we graduated, and they got a little bit of the language that this one company commander, he was talking, and he said, I want every swinging horn. That was not what he normally used. And hooray for Brigham Young, because there was about 15 or 20 of us that were from St. George that they became, well, so that's where I really learned to work. I went on a mission to Great Britain, and I was assigned at the London Temple, and there had been a terrible traffic accident where a little mini miner had not seen some horses, came around and literally took the belly off of one of these magnificent horses that were there. And the reporter thought that I had seen the accident. I heard the crash, and I walked a block away, but I didn't see the accident. So she came to see me to tell, and I said, well, I didn't see the accident. And so she said, well, what are you doing in England? It was the greatest opportunity to have newspaper publish about why we were in England. I remember the mission president who was over in Ireland, Steve Covey, called us, how did you do that? I mean, we try to get stuff, and you got this in all the national papers here in England. And I said, I don't. She asked me why I was there, so I told her. But the thing that was interesting is, what are you going to do when you go home? And I'd never expressed this before, and I said, I'm going to be a dental surgeon. I'd never, ever expressed that before. So I came back, and of course I didn't go to college out of high school. I was in the Army. So then I started my classes at Dixie, and we have two uncles. The other two Whitehead brothers are both dentists, and so that's how we got interested in that. And Andy Barnum was an incredible teacher, and we were set to go. So I applied to Creighton and got accepted. And I just got engaged to be married, and I remember telling my wife, okay, so I got accepted to go to Creighton, and we were not married then. And she said, really? You? I mean, it was really interesting, her response. So we went to Creighton. We were there 4 years. I became really in love with the surgical side of it. I called my uncle, who was a general surgeon. Everard Cox was his name, and he lived in Maryland, and I said, I want to apply some medical schools. He said, well, I know the chief of dentistry, oral surgery at Maryland. I'll put a good word in for you. And
so that Dixie network came in good right there.
Dixie network came in, and pretty soon this guy called me, and he said, I'm sending out the letters of acceptance. If you're half what your uncle tells me you are, then one got bumped, and you'll get the letter tomorrow that you've been accepted to go to Maryland to study maxillofacial surgery. And so that's how I got involved. I came back here. I was the 10th person on the medical staff in St. George. There was orthopedist, there was a radiologist, et cetera, and some general PT, but I was the only dentist then, number 10. Now there's over 700 on the medical staff. So that's how I got involved.
So you were number 10 on the medical staff in St. George.
Dixie Regional.
Dixie Regional.
Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital.
The 10th. And then now we're over 700.
Over 700.
My goodness. There's so much we could talk about your career, but there's also so much we could talk about in what you have meant to our institution of higher learning here. And it's the same with George. And maybe we could switch back to George for a minute.
Even more so with George.
And talk about this. I also realize as we sit here that there should be two other people in this room. Just like we alluded to earlier, there should be Lana Whitehead, one of the most amazing women I've ever met, beautiful master flautist, musician, and so many other things. And George, your dear wife Dixie, who is so amazing, musician and so many things. It's just that we can't get everybody in this room, and we're limited to about an hour. But I think you would both admit that they belong here because you two are here because of them.
Well, Dixie has perfect pitch, which my wife would love to have, but she does. I got one other phrase I want to tell you. You probably ought to have them come in and talk so you
That'll
can
be fun.
so you can verify this. But one of the great statements that ever came out of Mayor Carl Brooks's mouth when he would have people come and groups would come and he'd always begin his things. Everything I'm going to tell you either happened or could have happened.
Well, let me just tell you about my association with Dixie Spirit and what it meant. Of course, my brother being at dental school, my mom told me many times I was going to be a dentist. I wholeheartedly went after that. I had Dr. Barnum. I did a lot of these things. But I knew if I could get back to St. George after I graduated from Weber State, I could find a place. My line, I just follow in his footsteps everywhere he went. He worked and cooked at the Liberty Cafe. I worked at Dick's Cafe. I fed Robert Redford and all of the people that came there. I knew how to cut the steaks. I knew how to do everything. I became a good cook that way. Farron Losey got me a job to work up at Weber State when I left Dixie. And so we learned how to cook. We learned how to do things. We learned how to work hard. I just knew if I could get a degree and get back here into St. George, I could make something happen and I would be okay. I was really banking on this Dixie Spirit. And I was up at Weber and I was dating a few people and I had incredible roommates, Roger Nuttall and David Watson, and we were the only three from Washington County in Weber County. Nobody else went to school there. We did. They all had purposes. And I was just talking about, hey, I make this list. I thought of Lana. She plays the piano. She plays the flute. All these kind of things. Has great testimonies. I made myself up a list, except I wanted to marry somebody that was tall because I wanted to have some basketball players in that line. So one day, one of the girls came and she said, hey, I think I know just the girl for you. I said, is she tall? Yeah. Does she got a testimony? Yeah. Does she play piano? Yeah. She has perfect pitch. Well, what's her name? And when she said her name's Dixie, I said, I'm going over to MacArthur Jewelers and buying a diamond, and I haven't even met this girl. Because the Dixie Spirit resounded, I wanted to do this. And so I have been so proud of my wife. You know, I'm so proud to say to people, I painted her name on that red hill. I bet you didn't, you know. And so when she finally left Ogden and came down to Southern Utah, that was a big step for her. And she's been here, I don't know how many times when I was running the food service or even when I was vice president over development, that I would just say, Dixie, what are you doing now? We need a piano player for this. Come up and play background music or come accompany this person while I've never played. Come, she'll have the music you can do at a moment's notice over and over and over again. But the career that led me back here was really this pioneer spirit, the values that I knew that could be here. And then there were so many really good hard workers around me at that point. I was telling my wife this morning, from President Bruin all the way up through President Nadolb, every one of the presidents at Dixie College, I knew them personally. I knew their families. They knew me. They knew my family. They knew us by name. And they would ask us to do things that they didn't ask anyone else. And then one day, I was with President Nadolb in our meeting, and he said, I heard him talking about, we need a new building. This library, if we're going to be a university, just doesn't have the volumes. We need a bigger space and so on. I said, if you build that building, I know that name we're going to be putting on there. He said, you do? I said, yeah. We're going to call it the Jeffrey R. Holland Building. And I remember President Nadolb saying, George, that's borderline brilliant. His favorite line to me. And from there, all of these things fell in place. My brother was the development director. He gave up a storied career as a dentist to come and raise money and buildings for this little school that no one else had hardly ever heard of, even though there were 50 or 60 doctors that had graduated under Andrew Barnum over time, every one of them everywhere. people I gave corsages to. I knew them all because they graduated from this amazing little school that had so much power. So that Dixie Spirit, my year at school, I was the chairman of the homecoming committee. We had this big homecoming parade. Ginger Rogers was our grand marshal of the parade.
I remember that. I think I was maybe 12 years old.
Well, I was
13.
Yeah, I was not the grand marshal, but I was in charge of that parade.
Maybe I was a little older than that.
Yeah, I think so.
What class are you, George?
I graduated from Dixie College in 74, high school 70.
So we're 3 years different. So I was a little older teenager, but I met Ginger Rogers when you brought her here.
Who gets Ginger Rogers? Says, oh, another dentist, Dr. Nyson. He's a wonderful alumni of Dixie, and Janice. And you put those together, and they're friends of Rudy and Lois Iverson and all of these people that I love so much that I got to work for. And Dan Watson. And I remember Dan Watson was in Provo and needed a ride from Provo down to St. George, and I was coming down to just see about this job. And I talked his ear off all the way down, and I said, I'm going to come down. We're going to change this place. We're going to do this and this and this and this and this. He says, oh, that would be really good, George. I hope you get the job. I already had the job. Rudy needed a food service man, and I had all this Dixie connection, and, man, it took off from there.
So, George, I have to just interject here because your tenure as head of food services is legendary. I know I'm using that word a lot today, but it is truly legendary. And those of us who were the beneficiaries of that still talk about it. It will always be talked about what you did and how you did it at Dixie. And then you went from there to become a vice president. And
as far as the legacy I have in the food service there, I had great support. What an amazing bunch of people in the kitchen that they had the same motto I did. We'll work till we're done, and we'll get up tomorrow and we'll start another one. And the accountants would say...
That sounds like what you were talking about earlier with your parents and your grandparents.
Say, do you know how much overtime you're paying some of these people? Hey, we're getting it done. I will say one thing about the food service. We did serve, I think, the largest banquet in the history of St. George. We served 6,600 people for an Amway convention. We put up tents. We brought in refrigerated trucks to put everything in. We did everything. I called everybody I knew in a relief society to help do this, whatever. But we fed 6,600 people in 2 hours at a buffet style for Amway.
Amazing.
In addition to other things. And that was one of the things that was written up in restaurants and institutions nationwide. But it was great. And then to be able to follow in what he started, I wrote down some things I thought we just don't like to talk about ourselves, but it was great.
Well, maybe you could talk about your brother because you went from being a great oral surgeon to raising money for Dixie College. And I mean, what a transition, but also what a great example of the Dixie Spirit. Tell us some of those things.
One of the things that we were fortunate because there are other good people around us. I mean, Carl Brooks, as mayor, set the goal for a lot of us. George Rampton, he's steady Eddie. He's out all the time, prodding around, finding different things. My brother has this drive to let's set up that we can do this. We ought to get a National Advisory Council at Dixie. We're not so small for that. Went out and got 25 of the best notable people, alumni and other people, and pulled them together to be a National Advisory Council at this little school. And out of that, millions of dollars came in from those areas. But not so much that, but ideas of how we could fundraise. And so Dick started the Sears Art Gallery and the Sears Art Show, International Art Show, that I took over. And it got better and better and better while we were running this. And all of a sudden, hey, we got a beautiful Sears Gallery up in the Eccles building. There's so many things that came out of that. The Celebrity Golf Classic, one of my favorite things that my brother started, and I just think I made it better for him. I give him some notice, but I made it better because it happened.
You made everything better.
No, it just happened. It was so good. I made a list here of who's that we know or we in our thing. Ginger Rogers. Tom Brady I got to know because of Corey Dillon. Larry McCoy, an American League umpire. Marty and Tommy Barrett. Greg Maddox, Bo Belinsky, Marcus Banks, Keon Clark, Robbie Bosco, Dave Checketts, Johnny Miller, Kelly Downs, Lavelle Edwards, Jeremy Guthrie, Kevin Higgins, Lionel Hollins, Jeffrey Holland, all of the governors of the state of Utah, Dane Orge, Vernon Vance Law, Brandon Lyon, Reno Mahe, Corey Snyder, Barry Sims, Dan Truman, Larry King, on and on and on. Dr. J. There's so many people that came in to be celebrities at our Celebrity Golf Classic that knew us by name, and we knew them by name. I pulled this list off of my phone book, out of my written log, that I could pick up a phone now and call Corey Dillon. Or I could pick up a phone and call Corey Snyder, who was the home run hitter. He was legendary home baseball player for the Cleveland Indians, now the Guardians. But we were back at Kirtland one time, and I said, Corey, you think you could get us tickets? He'd been retired for 5 years. You think you could get us tickets for a Cleveland game? Oh, yeah, how many you need? 5. I go to the Cleveland game, and they said, you know Corey Snyder? You know Corey, he's the greatest baseball player we ever had at Cleveland. For us, those things are meaningful. But if you could go to people in the Alumni Association, the people that helped us do this or this or this, that would give you $5 or $10 or wanted to help you with this, or we'll go flip a hamburger at the tailgate party. All of that stuff was what the Dixie Spirit was out of. And we built a wonderful legacy, I think, with the help of others. I'm not one that wants to. You could go up, and if we looked at every building on there, you'd have a Richard Whitehead or a George Whitehead somehow associated with that.
It's
the
true.
Hozzies, boom, he got the Hozzie.
I'm the objective observer here who's confirming all of this because I've seen it, I've witnessed it over the last 40 or 50 years, and it's tremendous. I'm just full of this joy of being with both of you and thinking about where your ancestors and even your mom and dad were 60, 70, 80 years ago, and then where our community is now, and what the impact of the two of you and your families on all of that. And it all ties together in that whole Dixie Spirit ties it all together.
I've got to tell you one of my most embarrassing moments. When Neil Lundberg was elected mayor, he then had to appoint somebody to represent him on the city council. And that's another story. It'd be interesting to tell you sometime. But he appointed me. And then during that first year was when Ginger Rogers came to be the homecoming Grand Marshal. And Neil was no way in the world that he was going to present her a key to the city. And so that became my job. So at the big banquet and stuff, and I'd rehearsed some stuff about her and about Dr. Nyson, who helped to bring her here, and so on. And after I'd done the little bit, then Ginger leans over to kiss me, on the cheek, I suppose. And I just kind of hedged away like this, and the whole audience was just rolling. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then she said, I've been with a lot of the best leading men in all of the world, but I've never had any of them refuse a kiss. And then they went on. And so I think I said something, well, would you like to try again? But I was totally embarrassed. I remember Coach Croshaw, he was laughing so hard.
That is awesome. I want to get some perspective here because Ricky's from another generation. Do you know who Ginger Rogers is? No. Okay.
And putting on my top hat. Dancing in my dance.
That's part of what we're dealing with here is that we are talking about
Fred Astaire and Ginger
We're talking about the most legendary, the most iconic, the most amazing
platinum blonde
movie star of her era.
Best dancer in the world.
And I'm trying to think how we would equate it to today, but whoever the biggest star is, that would have been Ginger Rogers then. And she was right here in St. George, enjoying this Dixie Spirit and being a part of it.
I said to Dr. Nyson, how did you get her to come here? Well, I knew her, and she was patient. And so I said, I think you could be at the Grand Marshal up there. It's really, and she says, well, what's it like? And he says, well, the Rose Parade, it's kind of like that, only it's a little smaller scale. I remember her mentioning that when she spoke. And then she spoke at the Tabernacle the day after this banquet, and she had a great time here. She really did.
That's neat. George and Dick,
Our time up.
we're going to have to wrap this up for today. I realize that we're just touching the surface of so much here, but what you've shared today has been so special, and it's epic, really, the story of your family and who they were and who you have become and what you have meant to this community. And I feel blessed to be with you today. And I know that we have to wind this down, but if there's anything either one of you'd want to share.
I do have one thing. If we're talking Dixie Spirit, we would be amiss if we didn't bring up Rowena DeFury's name in one of these things. She created Dixie Spirit the entire 12 years she was at this campus, with Dixie songs, Dixie melodies, the patriotic numbers, all of the things. You could be any student and walk on that campus, and you could sing in program bureau if you couldn't carry a note. If you could just move your feet and do a couple of things, you were there. Well, when we've had a lot of different things and changing to the Utah Tech University, I wanted my children to know about Rowena DeFury and what Dixie music meant to me. So we had a big family reunion, 44 of us up in northern Utah, and I said, I want to teach my kids how to sing Dixie. And I had a couple of classmates come, and I had President Nadal come, and then all of my children. And I made up a T-shirt that had Dixie on the front and musical notes all underneath it. When I went to my wife and I said, I want them to learn how to sing, Are You From Dixie? Are You From Big D? Lovely, Lovely, Dixie, Reddest Sands I've Ever Seen. I went through all of the songs that Rowena taught us. But she never gave us any sheet music. She just wrote it on the blackboard. Maybe you were in one of those classes, or your wife, and you just learned the words and you did that. So my wife said, I'll take care of that. You sing these to me, and I'll write the music. So she wrote the sheet music to all of these by me singing them to her. And then she would play them back, and I said, no, I don't think that note's quite what it is. So now we have a volume of all of Rowena's music because my wife's ability with perfect pitch and to do this and a little help from AI or whatever, and boom, we have the Dixie Spirit again that can be played. All my children got these music. All of them sang these songs. They quite like them, but it's not like what they're having nowadays, but they all sing. The Dixie Spirit is so real in our family, and it's not just because my wife's name's Dixie. They all work hard. They know what that is. The value of pioneer ancestry is so deep and so true to our kids.
George, you've shared that beautifully, and it really does. That's been brought out perfectly with what you've shared today.
It might be a good time to talk another time about that. But I heard a talk just a couple of weeks ago that I thought really tied in with what George said. It was by the wife of the president of BYU Idaho now. She called it the Spirit of Ricks. And just so I would get it right, I thought we were going to talk more maybe about Dixie and so forth. But this is what she said. It was a talk she gave on the 16th of September of this year, so just a couple of weeks ago. And this is what she said. The spirit of Ricks is felt when we cheer for others, when we lift in quiet ways, and when we find joy not only in our own progress, but more importantly in the progress of those around us. In closing, this is a reporter, President Meredith invited the students to keep the spirit of Ricks alive and vibrant. This spirit not only connects us to our beginnings, but also points us toward what we are meant to become. And I thought, that's in pretty good words of this Dixie Spirit that we talk about. That's why we get so wound up inside of ourselves when they want to change the name or do something like that because they don't understand. And I thought she put it in words pretty plain. That's what it's about. And you could tell that she'd had some feelings being a Rick's student, and now it's BYU, Idaho. Well, you need to know that there was a spirit there. And I guess that's what I would conclude with, is that there's a spirit of Dixie. We sing about it, we do all of these other things, but it's there within us. It's within you, Lyman. You can't destroy it. You can't get rid of it. And you're a little bit offended when somebody else tries to tell you that it's not there, because it is there. And we love you, dear Dixie School.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, George. This has been just the most wonderful hour. Appreciate you both so much.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. The hot winds whirl around me and take away my breath. I've had the chills and fever till I'm nearly shook to death. All earthly tribulations are but a moment here. And oh, if I prove faithful, a righteous crown I'll wear. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. I hope that there's a heaven with rivers pure and clean, but I know that